of weeks ago, in my reaction video to the trailer for the second season of the One Piece live action adaptation, I mentioned that One Piece is my favorite manga of all time and that I love to do rereads of the manga and rewatches of the anime. Although I fast forward through Toei's endless flashback scenes because ugh. Anyway, I do a reread and rewatch of One Piece every 2 years because I really love the story and Monkey D. Luffy is my happy place. Anyway, I'm currently about to finish the East Blue saga for my reread, so I'm a couple of chapters away from Luffy's fight with Arlong, which means that I just completed the bit where Nojiko is telling the rest of the Straw Hats about Nami's history, sans Luffy, who decided to walk away because he knows Nami's heart and her backstory isn't going to change the certainty he feels about her, about his entire crew, to be honest. And of course, Zoro, who has already figured out that Nami isn't quite the witch she pretends to be. She did save him and Usopp, so that was all he needed to know. So he chose to sleep through Nojiko's story. Sanji, Usopp, and unknown to us at the time, Johnny and Yosaku, all stay to listen as Nojiko tells us of the tragedy that is the love that Belmere had for her daughters and how that led to her death. I'm not going to lie. No matter how many times I've read and watched One Piece, no matter the amount of reiteration of the story we've gotten, the events of Kokoyashi Village will always bring tears to my eyes because it speaks to a fundamental tenet within the world of One Piece and demands of those living within the world and we, the audience who are reading or watching the events, to ask ourselves the fundamental question of, is love worth dying for? And when the chips come down to it, will we choose to die so that those we love can live? And I don't know about you, but that is something that would always give me pause. Now, prior to us watching Belmere smile at Nojiko and Nami, telling them that she does not regret having them as her daughters and she would never deny them, as Arlong puts a bullet in her head and tells her to die for her foolish love, Oda had never killed any of the characters on page. Belmere, although it was in a flashback scene, was the first and she died for the love of her children. There had been the space, the opportunity given to her by the story itself for her to choose life. After a member of Arlong's crew notices her house further on the outskirts of town and Arlong made his way over there, Genzo offered her a way out when attention was called to the fact that the table had a setting for 3. Genzo was quick to say that it was because Belmere had offered to cook for him and the village's doctor, and all Belmere had to do was agree with it. If she had done so, her 100,000 berries, which she had barely managed to scrape together, would have been enough to save her life, since Arlong's demand was 100,000 berries per adult and 50,000 berries per child. All it would have meant would be her denouncing her girls, and Genzo and the rest of the village already had a dastardly plan of sending Nojiko and Nami off. As to them, they felt that the kids staying in Kokoyashi village would be just waiting for Arlong to discover them and kill them. Add the fact that the girls hadn't been documented yet in the village's register and everything was primed for Belmere to denounce them. She does not. She chooses to acknowledge them and her love for them, even when she could have gotten away with just ignoring them, when she had no idea that they were eavesdropping but knew that doing anything else would lead to her certain death. It would have been more convenient for her to have ignored them and their existence, but to her, her daughters mattered and her love for them was enough, even if it was what doomed her. And Arlong, who is still filled with all that hatred for humans, courtesy of his rage at how Fisher Tiger was betrayed and killed, scorns her for said love and kills her to prove the superiority of his hate over her love. Because I do think that it's important to recognize that Arlong's "die for your foolish love" is a statement that speaks to the difference in ideals, which is at the root cause of his fight with Belmere and which is eventually inherited via Luffy's fight with him. It speaks to how One Piece as a story really is not about killing the opponents like Oda says in the SBS, where he is asked why Luffy doesn't kill those he fights with. But it's really about showing how your ideals are better and will last longer than that of your opponents. And we see that in all the instances where these characters die for love. With Belmere, with Corazon, with Ace, with Whitebeard, with Scarlet, with Tom. Belmere might have died, but like she tells Nojiko and Nami before she is killed, happier days were ahead. It took 10 years and Nami accidentally finding her way to this pirate crew that act nothing like the pirate crew that took everything from her, to make her get that, to make her see that, to bring her around from Belmere's death to what lies on the other side of that, her own life. Her getting the chance to live freely as Belmere's always wanted, and Luffy's fight with Arlong is what serves as that final impetus to make that happen. When he sees the room where Nami was trapped drawing charts, where Arlong took the thing that she loved, navigating, and twisted it to serve his own aims while constantly breaking and hurting her, Luffy feels so much rage and he responds by destroying everything in that room and the room itself, because that's the only way to set Nami free, to set her love free, and to have her live again for herself and on her own terms. It's the ideological beatdown to prove that love would always triumph over hate. And we see this repeated with Don Quixote Rocinante, aka Corazon, and Trafalgar D. Waterloo. Once again, we have a character who had everything perfectly positioned for him to avoid death. He had spent years undercover as a marine covert operative, monitoring Doflamingo's Don Quixote's pirates and acting as a mute so that his brother Doflamingo would not suspect a thing. As he gathered intel and fed them back to Sengoku in his capacity as a commander of the naval forces, whilst trying and mostly failing to keep children from signing up with the Don Quixote pirates, things change when a dying law shows up. Once again, Corazon fails to dissuade the young Law from joining the Don Quixote pirates, and after revealing the truth about himself pretending to be mute and his plans to stop his brother, Corazon grabs Law and takes him on a journey to try and cure his amber-led syndrome. Things look bad until Doflamingo calls to tell him that he's found the Ope no Mi and he wants Corazon to eat it so he can cure Law. Corazon, who is aware that his time is up because 1, Doflamingo only wants him to eat the fruit so he can perform the surgery to grant Dofi eternal life, and 2, as he's already eaten the Nagi Nagi no Mi fruit and has been lying to his brother about not having any devil fruit powers, he knows that the gig is almost up. However, he also knows that the Ope no Mi is Law's only chance at survival, and this is where he makes the active choice to finally leave his brother, potentially risk death, all for the sake of Law getting to live. Because there were so many instances in the tragedy leading to Corazon's death that could have spared his life. And in each of those moments, he chose Law. He chose to save this boy that he's taken as his own family, that he loves as his family, and wants him to live. From going after the Ope no Mi with all the injuries he sustained whilst retrieving the fruit for Law, to him sending Law with a letter where he admits to everything his covert operations to serve the Marines in order to keep track of the Don Quixote pirates, with the hope that the letter would help Law get a Marine who would then save Law's life and his as well, unaware that the person that Law would meet would be Virgo, who reads the letter and brutally beats up Corazon for his betrayal. To him, and by him, I mean Corazon, of course, to him, hanging on after Doflamingo shoots him for the betrayal, making sure that he stayed alive for even an extra minute, an extra second to buy Law time, to keep his cries silent until he's out of reach of Doflamingo and his pirates, so that Law can get that chance to be free, to live. Just like with Belmere, Corazon's willingness to die in order to give Law the chance to live speaks to his ideals, his belief that compassion and kindness and love is what keeps and maintains our humanity, and is why he is so convinced that Doflamingo, who has none of those things, is a monster. A monster that even in death he couldn't bring himself to kill because he looks too much like their father. Corazon is the bleeding heart that Doflamingo can never understand and made the active choice to eliminate for his betrayal. And that is why Dressrosa once again sees Luffy fighting someone with the ideals that rejects the belief that to love is to be willing to die for others to live. And just as with Arlong, is the feat of Doflamingo proves yet again that Corazon is in the right with his sacrifice and finally sets Law free and offers him the closure he needs to live the rest of his life for himself, having successfully honored Corazon's death. With Ace and Whitebeard, Oda finally kills two characters in the present time and not in a flashback scene. With Ace, we see a character who was meant to have a public execution by the Marines be freed by a Luffy who had set sail from Hancock's Island to save his brother the minute he read the news in the newspaper. And just as he was about to walk away with that freedom, the moment arises where an exhausted and distracted Luffy falters, and Akainu moves to take advantage of that to kill him. And in steps Ace, immediately offering up his own life to save Luffy, dying for his love for his brother to give Luffy the chance to live. Whitebeard does the same for the Whitebeard pirates, giving his sons the chance to escape and live by standing firm till the very end, until Blackbeard shows up, of course. But before Teach even makes his appearance, Edward Newgate was already aware and resigned to the fact that he was going to die in Marineford. And so what he did was trade his death for the lives of his sons. Now, one could say that the event of Marineford did not follow the usual patterns of the fight of ideals, whereby Luffy ends up coming in to help support and uphold said beliefs about love being one that would always trump hate and is able to save others, seeing that Luffy heads to Marineford to try and save Ace's life and fails. But did he though? Because when we consider it, it did succeed in saving his brother's life. Matter of fact, Ace might have been further away if he hadn't been taunted by Akainu to come back. But most importantly, the sacrifice of Ace and Whitebeard challenges the very ideals that the Marines and the larger world, who have never gotten the chance to interact with the Straw Hats, have about pirates. If we go back to Nami's first meeting with Luffy in the manga, please, because I know the anime kind of made it all weird, like she's always been there. But in the manga, the first time they meet is at Orange Town, and she's surprised that him and Zoro, these two pirates who do not act like stereotypical pirates, i.e., rather than choose to abandon the other, they come back for each other to save one another. And while she's surprised at that becomes the very core of the Straw Hats, how their love for one another means that they end up coming back, showing up in the most dangerous of situations to help save their nakama. They are an anomaly. Their love and the sacrifices they are willing to make is an anomaly, but it is one that we see replicated with Ace's sacrifice and Whitebeard's too. Even though they both die, the fact that Luffy and the rest of the Whitebeard pirates were able to escape is proof that their ideals won at Marineford, and it was broadcasted for the entire world to see. And then there's Scarlet, Viola's sister and Rebecca's mother, who did successfully escape Doflamingo and his Don Quixote pirate's usurpation of the throne. After she and her daughter escaped Diamante's pursuit for 2 days, Rebecca's hunger is what causes Scarlet to risk going back into town for the sake of her daughter, with the hope that she's able to get her food so that she doesn't starve. And it is this decision, this choice, that once again, like the others on this list, she could have avoided by simply walking away. But because of her love, because of her desire for her daughter to survive, she walks straight into town, and whilst getting food is ambushed and killed by Diamante. Of course, it is this food in her hand that Rebecca sees when the Thunder Soldier, who they have no idea is Kyros, brings Scarlet back. And this is why Rebecca has the traumatic response of refusing to even admit to her hunger as a way of punishing herself, because she still feels guilty about her hunger being why her mother died. Which once again is why Luffy's defeat of Doflamingo matters, because just as it helps Law with healing and moving on from Corazon's death, it helps Rebecca as well with regards Scarlet. And of course, there's to a lesser extent Tom, the shipwright who built Goldie Rogers Oro Jackson and who spanned them due to him wanting to claim the blueprints to Pluton for Cyberpole, frames Frankie as being the one behind the attack on Water 7 when he, Spandam, was the one who had people steal Frankie's ship to attack the city. Tom, in order to protect his apprentices and very well aware that Frankie is innocent, but also because he wants to protect his life, takes on the responsibility of the Water 7 attack, using his amnesty from having built the sea train to gain pardon for that attack instead, thereby opening it up to be convicted and killed for building the Oro Jackson, which Tom was very proud to claim to show Frankie the worth of a shipwright and what they live for. And he's very happy to die with the knowledge that he kept to his truth and his ideals and saved Frankie and Iceberg. And I can't forget the honorary mention of Dr. Iriluk, who, although did not die in order to save Chopper's life, did commit suicide to keep Chopper's poison from being the cause of his death, which would needlessly have burdened his adopted son, whilst at the same time teaching Chopper what their ideals and goals as doctors should be, whilst urging him to live as well. The reason why I absolutely love One Piece as a story is because whilst light-hearted and one could say needlessly long, which by the way I disagree with, I personally find the story length just perfect, to me of course. But as I was saying, whilst light-hearted, One Piece is a story that always leaves me with hope and an urging for me to live, to do so for the many people who have sacrificed their lives, their dreams and their hopes to see me to this point. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I personally find it a story worth coming to again and again. Even whilst a part of me is terrified of how this story could possibly end, because death being the way in which others get to live has always been a core part of Luffy's story. And I worry about how Oda might choose to end it if he would see the theme all the way through with Luffy. Of course, those are just my thoughts. I would as always love to hear yours. Are you as terrified of the possible end to One Piece as I am? Let me know in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this fan and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. If you cannot, however, do consider checking out my other channels. One of them is my gaming channel and the other is for my ASMR content. They are all linked in the description bar if you are so inclined. Whichever the case may be, however, I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.